Today, we're super excited to have this session, Mobilizing White Identifying Investors for Racial Justice with our partners, Camelback Ventures. I'm just going to give a quick intro to start out in case this is your first start out event, and then I'm going to pass it over to the Camelback team for them to kind of get into the session. So StartOut's mission is to accelerate the growth of the LGBTQ+ community, working to drive its economic empowerment, building a world where every LGBTQ+ entrepreneur has equal access to lead, succeed, and shape the workforce of our future. And I can talk a little bit on the next slide about some of our programs and the impact that we've had so far. So StartOut has our own accelerator program. It's called our Growth Lab. It's the only LGBTQ+ specific accelerator, with our 56 graduated companies raising over $756 million in funding. We also have a mentorship program with over 300 mentors participating at any time for 6-month placements. We also have an expert office hours program and a network of 300 investors who participate in our Access to Capital program and Get Deal Flow. I know many of you are the folks who are on the call today, so thank you for that. We also have our own private forum and community events just like this one all year long. And all of those programs that I just mentioned are made possible by our valued corporate sponsors. So they're up on the screen now, and we just want to thank them for making this event and our events and programs throughout the year possible. And now I'm very excited to stop talking and hand it over to the Camelback Ventures team. We've been working with Camelback for a few years, sourcing founders and entrepreneurs in our programs for their fellowship program and making referrals that way. And so when we found out about their new Capital Collaborative program and the ways they're looking to address continued disparity in funding opportunities, really excited to work with them to bring that to our funding community, because we feel like it's really valuable. It's content that we haven't been able to provide in the past, but know that funders should have access to. So yeah, I'm super excited to hand it over to the team. They'll introduce themselves from there. And thank you so much for being here today. We're really excited to have you all.
Thanks, Kayla. I'm really excited to be with y'all as well. And thank you for welcoming us. I'm Hannah Whistler. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the senior lead on the Capital Collaborative team at Camelback Ventures. And we'll talk a little bit about how those two work together in a minute. But would just invite y'all in the chat, if you haven't already, and if you had, feel free to add your answer to the last question. Just make sure to share your name and your role if you want to share where you're calling in from. And then would love to hear, since it is the season, and I personally on my dog walk this morning enjoyed my fair share of the very first blackberries that are popping up. I'm on the North Oregon coast. I want to know your favorite summer produce or seasonal summer treat. So just go ahead and drop that in the chat. As y'all do that, I'll just share that like our time together is limited today. So knowing that we just won't be able to engage in discussion as much as we would hope. That's one of my favorite things about the Capital Collaborative programming we provide, is just the opportunity for group discussions, small groups, big groups, one-on-one, and really getting to like get into it with each other. So just know there is a bit of time for that. We're going to have a short time in pair breakout rooms later. But if you're yearning for that, that is something that's very like baked into our programming and most of the programming we promote, just because we think it's really important to have discussions as we learn together. But we have a short hour together today. So if it's a bit more sit and get, we apologize, and we hope you're still able to get something from it. So thanks for sharing. Ripe tomatoes. Yes, Logan, my friend sent a picture of some that her dad dropped off from their farm. We're not quite in tomato season in Oregon yet, so I'm just seeing an envy, at least on the coast. We're a little behind. Okay, awesome. And I'll let y'all continue to drop those in, but I'm going to continue in the interest of time with our agenda and opening. So today, after this opening portion, we're going to get into what the value of white folks doing racial justice work, specifically in funding, is. So that is the target audience today. And those are the folks that we predominantly work with, are white identifying leaders in funding. That being said, the topics that we're going to talk about today, if you work in or are connected to funding and funders, I think unfortunately, it'll still feel relevant, regardless of whether you are a white identifying funder. Beyond that, we'll talk about opportunities to engage in that work. We'll do our short taster Capital Collaborative learning activity, and then we'll get into a brief closing and questions. All right, so as Kayla shared earlier, our larger organization is Camelback Ventures, and Camelback's been around for about 10 years and started out and still does by offering a fellowship for BIPOC and undervalued entrepreneurs. And so the two branches of that fellowship are founders who work in education and founders who work with conscious tech. And we did just focus on that work for several of the first years of Camelback. And then back in 2018, the Camelback team did something that at the time was pretty revolutionary, and just did a big audit of all of the founders that we'd worked with and their ventures and how they were doing. And one of the main findings of that was that although our founders were equally or outperforming their white counterparts, they were receiving about a third of the funding. And so that's how Capital Collaborative, our branch of the Camelback team, was born. We work to address funding biases and ultimately move more money to BIPOC-led organizations and diversify power in the funding landscape. So that's where our little Capital Collaborative team sits as part of the larger Camelback Ventures organization. And we'll share more in follow-up about both Camelback broadly and Capital Collaborative more specifically.
Thanks, Hannah. Hi,
Yeah.
I am Jessamine, funder in residence at the Capital Collaborative by Camelback Ventures. And I am going to tell you a little bit about why. Why would a white identifying individual need to engage in formal learning around DEI, around JEDI, racial equity, justice work, whatever the terminology that you want to use to describe this space. As you heard from Hannah, we work with a lot of white funders on their journeys as they figure out what they don't know about racial equity and racial justice and learn how to integrate that knowledge into their work. So as we've done that work, we've heard various questions from them about whether it makes sense to put dedicated time and effort towards racial justice training. And as they've shared those thoughts or those doubts, we've also heard reflections from participants as they've come out the other side of training as well. And they've shared the value that their learning has led to for themselves and also for their organizations as well. So I'm going to talk you through some of the questions, the doubts that people might have about why a white person might need to engage in racial equity, and what we have heard how people who have done deep engagement, how they would answer those questions. So first question. Shouldn't I just stand back and let my colleagues of color take the lead when it comes to racial equity? I don't want to step on any toes. Like, I don't want to be the one thinking, the person charging in and saying I should be in charge. And so this is a very, very valid question, right? White folks have been centering ourselves for a long time. And structured racial justice learning, what we have heard, can really help white folks reimagine and redefine their role in the funding world. So oftentimes we see white participants in racial justice learning go from philosophically aligned with the movement, but standing on the sidelines, to having clear actions, steps that they're trying to take in their everyday work, knowing that those steps and those actions are appropriate as a white person engaging in racial equity and also suited to their own skill set. So it's really about figuring out what is the right and appropriate role for you, given your identity, given your position in the world. Next concern that we often hear, what if I say or do the wrong thing? Another very valid concern. And I think what our recommendation would be for anybody who is feeling like this is their concern as a white person thinking about this is look for a white affinity space. What we hear from participants who go through white affinity spaces is that in those learning environments, they have the safety to try. They tell us that they feel emboldened because they have the ability to make mistakes where people understand that they are just learning. And one of the participants of the Capital Collaborative, the cohort we run, put it this way. I'm going to read just a quote from them. They said, "We pushed each other to take the boldest step, have the difficult conversations, and to be honest about our insecurities and vulnerabilities, which compels us to do more." And then just to mention as well, you know, that person brought up the point about insecurities and vulnerabilities. And I think, you know, another version of this concern, what if I say or do the wrong thing, is also, what if I feel the wrong thing? You know, what if I react to something that I hear in this educational space, and I react negatively, or I don't react how I hope I would react, you know? And something again that I'll mention that we've seen is that when you find a program that really understands that dynamic, what they'll often do is they'll provide an equity coach for you. And that's something, again, we do at the Capital Collaborative. We provide equity coaches, a race-alike coach, to do one-on-one conversations and coaching to help navigate those reactions, those moments when you're like, this isn't how I necessarily want to show up in you know, in reaction to this information, but this is what's happening. I need to process it. So the idea is that these spaces are places that are safe to try to learn. Next concern that we often hear: I've already done DEI training. I already did a course. Why would I need to do more, right? I've done that, tick the box. One thing that I would say about racial equity training is that the opportunities are so varied. They're varied by stage of learning. They're varied by the focus of learning versus doing. So maybe it's more about historical context setting versus putting things into action. They're varied by industry specific application. There's a whole bunch of characteristics that you can look at when you think about where you want to do your racial equity training. And what I would say to folks that have already done DEI training is there is always something more to learn. And if you are already a number of steps into your equity and justice journey, I would recommend looking for opportunities that provide more industry specific knowledge sharing. Those are the spaces where you're going to find opportunities for creative lifetime problem solving, exposure to new ideas and practices that maybe your peers in the industry might come up with, brainstorming, and really being able to harness the collective wisdom of other people who understand your work and your industry. Next concern: what if my role isn't investment facing? What if my role doesn't include directing funding in one way or another? Is there anything that I can still do that's still substantive? Very short answer here: yes. Yes, there is absolutely stuff that you can do here. We see people working in operations, people working in finance, people working in talent management, people working in marketing, figure out how to make significant shifts in culture, in policies, in processes, to change those policies, those practices to become more equitable, or make changes that can potentially even be more impactful than individual funding decisions, especially when those policy decisions, those practice decisions cut across systems. They can shape people's mindsets and potentially determine really big contracts and the way that your firm places its business in other ways, not just the investment pools and portfolios. Penultimate question that we hear is the takeaway, if I participate in racial justice training, is the takeaway that I as a white person should just quit my job so that a person of color can step in? Answer to this one, a little bit more complicated, honestly, right? We have seen folks experience a whole range of realizations, which for some of them is yes. Their conclusion is they feel like they should quit their job and they should leave so that the firm can hire somebody who perhaps has more proximate experience or brings a different perspective. But I will say, when those decisions are made, it can take years to do it right? Rather than just have a knee-jerk reaction. So we don't see people just quitting the next day after they finish their training. But the majority of folks actually realize that they can be more helpful staying where they are, alleviating risks for their colleagues of color, or consciously using their privilege to direct more money to leaders of color. So really the answer here is going to be specific to you, specific to your circumstances, the environment that you work in, where your firm is at the time that you're doing the training. Last one that I will cover for you. One other concern that we often hear is this going to be depressing and guilt-inducing? Like, I need more joy in my life. Not less. I don't need to be weighed down anymore. So again, fully honest answer here for you. This one really is dependent on the program that you choose. So as a white person looking for a racial equity training program, all programs will have sessions that are heavy, right? As the nature of the work and, the context of this issue that we're trying to address, right? Systems of oppression. Part of that work is understanding what we're dealing with and reckoning with the full weight of racism. And many programs deliberately build fun, community, enjoyment, lightness into the programs too. And I'm going to read you just one more quote because I'm actually really, really proud of this quote that we had from a woman who went through the Capital Collaborative recently, actually. So she said, "I felt like I went through paradigm shifts every hour, but the one thing that really stuck with me was with justice work, there's this feeling that it has to be painful and sad and rooted in shame. It's always supposed to be serious. So people come to it with trepidation. And I really felt, especially in this cohort, that the arc of it was joy. And it followed all the way along, and that's where it ends. And that's the paradigm I want to hold with me." So there are lots of reasons we can bring up about why we might not want to do the work or we're not sure if it's right for us. But I can tell you, so many folks that we have worked with have found layers of value and community as well in doing racial equity, structured learning as a white individual, particularly in the funding industry. And with that, I will hand over to my colleague, KK.
Thank you, Jasmine. Hi, y'all. I am KK, and I'm part of the Capital Collaborative team. I use they, them pronouns. We know that white people need to do this work, and we find it especially powerful when they can do it in a safe racial affinity space that allows us as white people to really unpack ourselves and some of those ingrained beliefs. It may seem counterintuitive at times to do anti-racism work as an all-white group or with white facilitators, but as many folks of color have pointed out, it is the responsibility of white people to not only unlearn our internalized racism, but to help each other do so. And these racial affinity spaces offer us the opportunity to speak honestly, bluntly with each other, but also to support each other, coach one another, and maybe ask some of those embarrassing questions without risk of hurting or overburdening people of color. We know, although they often have less power, that people of color largely are asked to take on this work and burden with the majority of it. Our team has learned a tremendous amount from the fellows that we serve and through the racism that they face. And so we believe it is up to us as white people to become experts in our own practice of unlearning this. And so in a little bit, Hannah is going to lead us through an activity that will provide an example of some of the ways that we as white people specifically operate and some of those tripwires that can be more specific to us. But in the meantime, I would love to go over, put together a little list of some varied trainings and learning opportunities provided by peer organizations across the country. that you all can readily engage in, and that will hopefully take some of that legwork out of acting on intent. We've tried to provide a range of opportunities that include one-off trainings, series, cohort, and communities of practice, depending on what you're looking for at this time. And we will provide a full handout of these opportunities later. Although I would like to just take a minute to highlight a few of these opportunities whose work we admire and also feel provides a unique opportunity for learning. So the first one I just want to point out is Unity Summit, which is a 3-day convening for those in philanthropy. And it is a mixed race space. And this is just a great one-off opportunity. It is one of philanthropy's largest and most diverse convenings that hosts around 1,500 people in person, as well as hundreds of virtual attendees. And you'll hear from a wide variety of communities and experiences, and participants who are there will have the opportunity to kind of deepen their individual and institutional practices to advancing equity through an intersectional lens. The next one I want to point out is this Liberated Capital donor community. So this is put on by Decolonizing Wealth, which some of you may be familiar with. This is an ongoing community with a mixed race space that's open to any contributing members through either a one-time donation or a monthly donation, and is really a funding vehicle, a giving circle that's aimed at moving untethered resources to Black, Indigenous, and other people of color for liberation and racial healing. And then another one I wanted to point out was just the Harmony Initiative by Justice Funders. We've recently worked through them with one of our conversations in which we call It's Not Your Money. This is a 8-month-long cohort for those in philanthropy that provides a mixed race space, largely focusing that is majority BIPOC, about 80% or more, and equips grant makers with community skills and resources to transform philanthropy for equity and social justice. And lastly, just did want to highlight another cohort opportunity that we certainly know of and we'll hear a little bit more of today, which is Capital Collaborative. So you know our team now, and we host a white affinity cohort over a 7-month period for philanthropic and impact investor professionals that are really looking to come from the grant-making foundations and corporations across the United States that are really ready to critically examine both their individual and organization's commitment to racial equity, but may not know how. And we feel that we have a unique approach driven by our experience in funding our founders, our Camelback Fellows, but also bringing together a community of accomplices that really want to engage in a thoughtful curriculum and an action-oriented curriculum. So again, I will be sharing a resource list of this a little bit later, but for now I'm going to stop sharing so Hannah can kick our next activity off.
Awesome. Thanks, KK. All right. So if you've kind of been in sit and get mode, I invite y'all to engage sort of the other half of your brain, because we are going to transition into a little bit of a teaser session. So in our Capital Collaborative programming, we have different types of sessions with different goals, such as community building, learning, and activation to action. And within our learning sessions, as KK highlighted a little bit earlier, some spaces are mixed race and or led by BIPOC leaders, and others are specifically white affinity learning spaces to give our participants a space to be brave and vulnerable and work through topics of white supremacy culture without burdening colleagues of color or hesitating to share experiences. So I share all of that to say that the session we're going to do a segment of today is an example of the later. So normally we would do this in a white affinity space. However, I specifically chose this activity for this group because of the funding industry's history and culture, regardless of race, or whether you are a funder or work with funders. We know that people interacting with funding are likely to have experienced some of the things we're going to talk through because of the history and just found the way that the funding landscape was created, basically. So keeping that in mind, The intention here is to give you a sense of what one of these learning spaces might feel like, also have a mini learning opportunity, and hopefully it will, by the end of it, you will feel like this is more accessible and less intimidating, this type of learning and action taking, than you might have thought when you joined us today. So we will have a few minutes at the end to invite questions and share some additional supports of our Camelback and Capital Collaborative teams. So if you do end up with questions or seeking like more support on some of the things that we talk about today, please feel free to jot those down. And if we don't have time to get to them, we're going to share how you can connect with folks on our team. All right, the last thing that I'll say before we dive in is that the resource I'm going to share for this exercise is from an organization we've worked with several times throughout our different Capital Collaborative cohorts called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusiveness Consulting. And the leaders at that group allow us to use this resource because they want this information shared with folks who want to learn and make change. They want it spread far and wide. The learnings, but we ask that you don't do any screen recording beyond the actual recorded session or copy these materials because they were created by that group and we want to make sure they're being fairly compensated and recognized if these are used more formally in the future. Okay, before we dive in, grab a piece of paper or pull up a document where you can take a few notes, nothing formal, but just somewhere where you can jot down a few thoughts. And we'll just set the intention here that we want to be honest about our own behaviors and our team's behaviors and to be curious, but ultimately we want to call ourselves into this work. This is not intended to be a call out or gotcha, but an invitation to think about our actions and the impact they might be having. Do the awkward little screen share moment. Okay. So this activity is about exits from race and gender issues. So today we're going to be talking about a list of exits and just recognizing when we may have taken them or seen folks on our team take them. Exits are ways society has trained us to take issues of race and gender off the table when they're brought up. While people in advantage groups may experience greater social pressure to take exits or more training to take those in subtle ways, anybody can take an exit regardless of race or power within their organization. So I'm going to read through just some different examples of how we can take exits, how we can divert the discussion or the actions being taken when somebody attempts to bring up race, racism, or gender discrimination in our work. I ask that if I read an exit that you recognize as something you have done or your team has done, just note it. It doesn't have to be the full title, but just write yourself a little note so you'll remember what you were talking about when we move to the discussion portion. And then at the end, I am going to ask you to pick 1 to 3 of these exits that you want to focus more on. So if you want to note that as you go, feel free. Why? Okay. The first type of exit we call a good apple, bad apple. And this is just diverting back to your good intentions, regardless of impact. So, oh no, that's not what I meant, or, but my intentions were good when somebody brings up an issue of race or racism. Saying it's already handled. So when somebody brings something up saying, oh, well, we're already fixing that in this way, or we already tried this, so don't worry about it. It's being taken care of. I don't believe you yet. So when somebody brings up a concern saying, I need more concrete examples, I need more data. Immediately jumping to actions and tactics. And so as soon as something's brought up saying, okay, well, we're going to fix that by doing this, or, okay, just tell me what I need to do to fix it. And I'll pause on this one and say, I'm not saying you should never take action. You're probably, some of these you might say, it's nuanced, or maybe it's not always bad to bring something up like this. That's true. And we always want to be asking why we're doing something. And so these are often used to take race and racism off the table, but we're not saying you can never ask for an action item again. So we recognize that there's nuance here. So if you're feeling kind of a push and pull, very normal. Acting as a savior or parent figure. So just saying, what can I do to fix this? How can I solve this problem? Rather than listening to the person who's bringing up the issue or might be more proximate to the problem that they're bringing up. Explaining it away. So saying, okay, yeah, that was bad, but that was just a one-off. Or, well, that person that said it isn't a main part of our team, so it was just them, it's not us. Waiving responsibility. So, ooh, yeah, that is an issue, but it's not our team's job to solve it, or that's not our department. HR needs to deal with that. Shifting the focus. So this happens a lot when someone explicitly brings up race and saying like, well, yes, but you know, discrimination against gender is also an issue. So what are we doing about that? Or ageism is also an issue. What are we doing about that? Denying relevance, just simply saying, no, race or gender is not at play right now. That isn't relevant to this context. And then lastly, attributing the issue to a quality of the complaint. So saying the person who brings it up is oversensitive, saying they're always playing the race card, basically just taking away someone's credibility. So I will give y'all a moment here. I'm going to leave this screen of the ones we just went through up. So if I was going quickly and you didn't get a chance to jot down the ones you want to think more about, I'll give you a minute to do that, and then I'll do the same thing on the previous screen. Okay, going back. Here are the first 5 that I went through if you need another minute to take a look there. My dog is having the nap of her life in the background, so sorry if you can hear her snoring. It is a dog, not me. Okay, so we are going to spend about 5 minutes, maybe a little longer, in pairs and breakout rooms. And I have one main thing I want y'all to focus on, and then if you have time, you can move into talking about a couple of the other things. So choose 1 to 3 total of the exits. Even if you jotted down every single one and have said, I've noticed me or my team doing every single one of these, we can't do it all today. So pick 1 to 3 that you want to focus on short term. So in the next few weeks in your work, you want to hold yourself accountable to not doing it, planning for situations when you know you do it, and preparing what you might do instead, or calling people in who you notice on the team doing it. So just making a plan of 1 to 3 you want to work on. And y'all can just discuss which ones you want to work on for shared accountability. You can discuss why, just have a little conversation about that. And then if you have time, some other discussions you might want to go to are, how are you going to hold yourself accountable to working on this? How will you check in with yourself on commitment and progress? And then we know there's a reason we do this work in cohorts at the Capital Collaborative. We know how helpful it is to have accountability buddies and folks that you are bringing along in the work and you can use to hold each other accountable. So think of someone on your team or in your life who you want to bring into this and say, hey, I'm holding myself accountable to not dismissing people's complaints based on credibility. And here's how I'd like you to check in with me about that. Or you don't need to do anything, but I want to share with you next week what I've done. Just someone you could bring along that you know wants to support you in this. Can I have someone copy these instructions into the chat, knowing that people won't have them in their breakout rooms? And if you already did it, of course you did. Okay, perfect. So KK is going to go ahead and open the rooms. You'll be in random pairs or a trio if you're lucky to talk about this. And we will bring y'all back together at 42 after. Okay. There they are. Okay. I think everyone is back now. Welcome. I know that was short time, but hopefully you got to get into it a little bit and maybe meet someone new or reconnect with someone. Before I pass it over to a couple other folks to close, I would just invite y'all to put in the chat either one of the exits that you're gonna be working on, just to share a snippet from your conversation, or a different takeaway from your conversation if there's something else that's more valuable that you want to share. Share an exit that you're going to work on or something else you want to from your discussion. And if you want to talk more about how to work on these or supporting yourself and your team in working on them, again, we'll share some stuff at the end about how you can reach out to us. But with that, I will go ahead and pass it over to Jessamine to begin our end.
Thanks, Hannah. The beginning of the end. Does that sound ominous? No, it's not ominous at all. It's very friendly, I promise. So really, our purpose today with this very short, tight amount of time was to invite you to pursue whichever learning approach resonates with you and gets you mobilized. So whether that is the Capital Collaborative cohort, if you identify as a funder and as a white individual, or whether that's another program on the list that we've curated, and KK is going to post that in the chat for us now, or if it's something completely different that, you know, you saw somebody post something on LinkedIn, or you got an email or saw something in a newsletter highlighting some sort of racial justice education opportunity that feels like it fit for you. We just want to encourage everybody here to do the work somewhere. We know that when we're all doing our own racial justice, racial equity, education and learning, that we're all more equipped to challenge systemic biases, foster inclusivity within our organizations, across our sector, and within our society as well. So with that, you'll see the curated list in the chat right now. But right now we have just a couple of minutes. If you have any questions that are burning that you'd like to ask us about racial equity education, about what it's like to work with white funders on this topic, now's your chance. Feel free to raise your hand or just take yourself off mute. We're a small group, I think we can manage. Yeah, Linda.
Yeah, a couple things. One is I don't have access to your chat, so hopefully you'll follow up with an email and I'll be able to get the resources that you're sending. Great conversation. I think it's something that I work at Bank of America, run an accelerator program for minority underserved, and clearly access to capital is like the #1 concern. And I do work with a lot of funders who say that it is their intention to provide, to find startup companies who are underserved or underrepresented. But the reality is different, because at the end of the day, it's there tends to be a bias to go with what you know will work and what is a proven we'll say revenue generating scenario. And the proven, or the ones that have been successful by and large, have been from the typical white male startup companies. And so I think that's been a challenge. I love this training. Anyway, what was I going to say? I met Nick on the phone in the breakout room. And the first thing I noticed is, and hope Nick, I told you I was going to bring this up. So he has a very strong accent. And as you know, a native English speaker, that is something, it automatically triggered my bias. And I became aware of it and said, hey, give the guy a chance, listen a little bit closer. And I think, you know, you're talking about people of color, but there's also these other characteristics of maybe, you know, foreign people with strong accents that we need to make sure that we stay open to and stay, you know, connected and patient to understand where they're coming from. So I just wanted to bring that up, that was my experience in the breakout room. And I think there's a lot of the exit strategies that you that you shared that I can take advantage of and bring back to my team. So that was a lot. Sorry about that.
No, it's wonderful. Thank you, Linda. I appreciate you sharing your experience in the breakout room. And yeah, the main topic for us as a team and as an organization is racial equity and racial justice, but that training can be layered on to gender bias. It can be layered on to other ways that we think about marginalization of other people's experience, other people's identities, and the judgments that we make of them as well. So appreciate that point. And please, when we send through that information to you, Linda, we will, about our program, about others, about the recording of this, like, please share it with those other funders. We would love to have them engage. Like, those are the folks we want to be engaging with, so that, we're not just saying these things, we are learning how to implement them in our funding decisions and approaches. Thank you. Bruce, I saw your hand up. You can take yourself off mute.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. It's always curious, these kind of workshops. I guess my comment was, there's like some department stores that have programs that they're created to reach out to BIPOC population. And I've been going to them, looking at them, and they're always like on a national level, as opposed to a state or a local level. And I know they want to get more bang for their buck, but how would you suggest to get through that? So we say, look, I've got a local project that will embrace your story in this area right here. I mean, you're doing your national, but this project will bring people to this store at this time. How do you convince them on it's worth them funding?
That is a great question, Bruce. And actually, I think this is a good opportunity for me to bring in my colleague, Caroline, who's joined us on the call today, because Caroline works a little bit more directly with the Black, Indigenous, Brown, people of color leaders that Camelback funds. And I'm guessing, Caroline, you field questions just like this more regularly than I do.
Yeah, hi. Well, and it's great because Bruce and I got to connect in our breakout room as well. I mean, the fellowship program that Camelback operates that offers 40K in capital, community, and then the connections of our network is agnostic to geographic location, so that we can really invest in as many entrepreneurs of color, women, and non-binary founders in the early stages of their ventures. But I think what's really exciting is how we can see the ways that like place-based strategies and communities still come together through our fellowship network. And that just happens organically in the conversations of the fellows and then in their extended alumni activities. So it's something that isn't part directly of our investment strategy, but that we take lead from when it comes to our fellows and the ventures they're building. Did I answer that question? Can I offer anything else?
Well, let me give you an example. For example, here in Mesa, they have the Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport. Are you guys familiar with that? East Valley, no. It's an airport. It originally was Williamson Air Force Base, which was back in the 40s, the Air Force Base here in Arizona. They train pilots. And a lot of people don't know that there are over 200 African-American soldiers there that were not allowed to live on the base at first. And so we talk about that base, how wonderful it was, but we never mentioned them. And so I'm reaching out to people, say, hey, why don't I do an exhibit in the airport so you can remember those folks? And also there was the first group of 10 women, female pilots came out of there, which nobody knows about. It's like, wow, Arizona did that. And so it's like, how do we get funding? Say, okay, this is something that's going to help not just the community, but the airport and people walking through, people going, wow, we didn't know that Arizona was doing that kind of progressive stuff, if that's what you want to call it, kind of thing. But I guess that's the question. How do you get those funders to see the value in it?
Bruce, maybe you've already done this, so I apologize if I am repeating things that you've already been acting on, but I wonder if you've connected with your local community foundation. If you're familiar with community foundation, if you're not familiar with community foundation, excuse me, there's usually one in almost every region of the US, and they're focused specifically on drawing in funders to fund local issues, to fund things within that neighborhood, that community, raising up kind of the history and the the talents and the stories of that local area. So if you haven't already, I definitely recommend researching your local community foundation. And then what we can do as well is we'll share with Kayla. There's a resource on the website called Candid. Candid is a resource for fundraisers and also funders, and they have a search option where you can go and you can look up local foundations in your area, which might be another way to identify folks that are interested in funding in your specific geography. Caroline, did you, I know we have, has been demonstrated by the comments, we've got folks who have a variety of different roles and wear lots of different hats. And Caroline, I think you were going to just draw a little bit of attention to some other Camelback Ventures opportunities, just given the diversity of participants.
Yeah, I have a few offers for folks who are plugged in with supporting or funding entrepreneurs. If you'd like to connect with our network of BIPOC women and non-binary founders, both those who were accepted to our fellowship program, but also those who just applied and were not accepted, in a way to diversify your funding networks, feel free to reach out to me and we can work on identifying a curated list of introductions to support that. If you have founders who you think could be a good fit for the Camelback Fellowship and want to nominate them for the next time we open up an application, we're always looking to expand our reach as well to be meeting more founders. And then lastly, if you host any kind of like application process, whether it's for a grant, a fund, or another resource opportunity, and want to work with other professional folks in that space, I host a peer learning group on a monthly basis with other accelerators, incubators, and foundations, where we talk about best practices on how to host transparent and equitable decision-making processes for applications. So all three of those things I'd love to connect on. I'll just drop my email in the chat and then some extra materials for the follow-up.
Great. Thanks so much, Caroline. And I know we're running out of time here. And so we really just wanted to take a moment to thank all of you for showing up today, and certainly start out for not only the work that they're doing, but for working with us today and putting on this mobilizing session. I did just want to plug again that opportunity resource list and ensure that you're seeing Caroline's info in the chat there. If you're a founder who'd like to connect with her, she's a fabulous resource. And I'll plug a few on the resource list, which is just that to stay engaged with Camelback Ventures, whether that be as a funder or a founder interested in the work we do, a great way to stay engaged is to follow us on LinkedIn. You'll see both sides of the work we do and be able to engage there and stay updated, as well as checking out or signing up for our Capital Collaborative newsletter, which will provide some tidbits and some thought leaders sharing some hope and also demonstrations of just funding in the world that we're striving for. And of course, more information on the Capital Collaborative cohort and some of those opportunities I reviewed earlier today. So all